What happens when compliance chooses you and then becomes your greatest asset? Today on the Compliance Advantage, we're joined by Melanie Sponholz, Chief Compliance Officer and Director of Responsible Investing at Wad Capital Partners. From physical therapist to private equity strategist, Melanie shares how she helps portfolio companies turn compliance into a value driver, not a cost center. If you're a healthcare CEO looking to scale smart and stay ahead of risk, you won't want to miss this.
Welcome to the Compliance Advantage podcast. This is the place where we help at-risk stakeholders in healthcare transform compliance into a strategic advantage. I'm your host, Ross Ronan, founder of Ronan Healthcare Compliance and a healthcare compliance strategist with nearly 30 years of industry experience. I'll help you transform compliance into a catalyst for innovation and growth. Remember, compliance pays dividends. Invest today. Welcome to the Compliance Advantage. Today we have Melanie Sponholz. She's the Chief Compliance Officer and Director of Responsible Investing for Wad Capital Partners. Melanie, thank you for joining me today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Tell us a little bit more about yourself. I know you've got this extensive history in compliance and different areas of healthcare. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So if you would ask my 12-year-old self what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would not have said compliance officer, shockingly. Actually, healthcare even was a second career for me. I actually came out of college. I was an English major and worked for Random House in publishing. I was an editorial assistant when I first graduated. But a few years into that career, I was volunteering at a hospital in New York City. And I realized how much more I enjoyed interacting with people all day. And so I decided to go back to school, and I fast forward, ended up a physical therapist, which was quite a number of years ago. We won't say how many. And then I started what I call the great Plinko board of life, where I stuck my chip in healthcare as a physical therapist. And I really love that I was a geriatric specialist, which I truly enjoyed. I really love working with the aging population. Did shift into more of a quality assurance role after a number of years in that industry. And from there, I got voluntooled into compliance. So that's where it all started. There was a big investigation going on, and our attorneys at the time said, you really need to formalize your compliance program and have a compliance officer. And they said, oh, Melanie will do it. And so here I am all these years later, and I morphed from that healthcare industry segment into others. So I spent a number of years in home infusion, and actually that was my first experience with private equity, because I worked for an equity-backed organization initially, went through their whole life cycle, ended up after a merger with a big publicly traded company. And that's where I was when Wad Capital Partners found me. And they found me because of my PT experience, because they had just partnered with an outpatient PT company. And here I am 8 years later. I work as a strategic resource for all of our healthcare companies, and on the data privacy side with our software technology companies as well.
Yeah, I always tell people, this happened to me and it happened to you, and most people that I talk to in compliance, back in the day, no one ever really chose compliance. It just kind of picked you out of a hat. And like I had a good friend of mine who was an associate general counsel call me and said, hey, you're an RNJD. Would you like to be our compliance officer? And I said, okay, what is a compliance officer?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, 7 elements, all the things come up. And all of a sudden, I'm chief compliance officer of somewhere trying to figure out how to get a message off my voicemail from the OIG that it was there for 3 days. So that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about how, because WAD's a little different than a lot of the private equity groups that we deal with, and probably that you're affiliated with too, to take an individual and really put them in that compliance realm. Because there's two kinds of compliance with private equity, right? There's this healthcare compliance. I need help with my portfolio companies to help kind of generally run that. And then there's this kind of banking, investment, FINRA, all the other different kinds of financial compliance that they need too, right? So how did WAD just all of a sudden turn around and go, I can see compliance as being an advantage for our investments. It's protecting our investments. It's really making a turnaround. how does that interact with Wad?
Yeah. So, and it's interesting because my full title is Chief Compliance Officer, Portfolio Operations.
Okay.
So we do have a compliance officer who does all of the financial compliance for the firm itself. So that can be confusing sometimes when people hear my title. But Wad has been investing in healthcare companies we just had our 30th anniversary as a firm, and really throughout that history as a firm, healthcare has been a large portion of the portfolio.
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, if you're in that healthcare space for that long, you can see how a compliance problem can significantly impact the value of a company, right? Or the reputation of a company. And so I think just because it's not just one or two companies here and there in their portfolio, it's one of their two areas of concentration for their investing, that they're very familiar with that. And they had been thinking about it, first having an in-house resource for some time for that reason. And then we crossed paths because of Ivy Rehab. So thank you, Ivy Rehab. That wasn't going to work in physical therapy again, wasn't really the next step for me career-wise. But we started the conversation. And in all honesty, I wasn't sure at first that I wanted to work in this space, but the more conversations we had, the more apparent it was to me that they valued compliance and saw it as a strategic advantage for their businesses. And it was pretty impressive. I talked to person after person at the firm, and they were all singing from the same songbook about why it was important. And it just sounded so interesting to me to have an opportunity to work with all of these different companies in lots of different areas of healthcare, that I figured, how do I not try this? And I'm still here 8 years later because it's pretty fun. So
We get the message out, right? We get the message out.
Yeah.
Wad's doing a great job. You are too, of investing in compliance and seeing that it actually can be not necessarily a cost center, but something that actually can be beneficial for everybody. So that's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So let's talk a little bit about your favorite book, philosophy, mentor, person, or whatever it may be, that has influenced kind of how you do things, how you work, and your leadership decisions.
Wow. I mean, that's a broad,
I know
that's a broad
you
question.
can do books if you want to. I love books, but I had
So
to expand it sometimes because people are like, I don't have a book. I don't like to read. I'm like, okay.
yeah. No,
Well,
well, now English major. I actually
I
chose
know.
being an English major because I would rather read books for 4 years, than novels for 4 years, than textbooks for 4 years. So I really do enjoy that. I pretty broad range of influences. I mean, my approach to life as a whole, there's a few books that have resonated with me. I love the Four Agreements. I don't know if you've read the Four Agreements.
And
I might have it sitting on my floor here. Let's see. I do. There you go. Four
okay.
Agreements.
Do
Because I pick it up and reference it sometimes, but it's really just an approach to life. It's very simplistic. It's very much about being your authentic self, being true to your word, doing your best in life, not making assumptions. I mean, it's just a very core philosophy, very simple, that I think you can apply to any situation in life. On like a purely practical level, there's a book called Getting Things Done, which is kind of an organizational management philosophy that I can see you're familiar. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. I love that for just very basic things, like it gives you a really solid approach to managing your inbox in your email, or your approach to meetings, so that, I don't know about you, but how many times have you throughout your career been in a meeting that was a waste of time, right?
Right.
Because you came out of it and no one had a concrete action coming out of it. It's just a very tangible book of advice on how to manage daily business living. That one's been pretty influential. On the compliance front, well, I should also say all the books by Susan Piver, who is my meditation instructor,
Oh, good.
are fabulous. She has a great book on the Enneagram, which you and I have talked Enneagram before.
Love the Enneagram.
She has a great book on Buddhism and the Enneagram. That's pretty cool. But that I love because it's about how to communicate, right? So if you understand yourself, first of all, because if you don't understand yourself, you're lost already. But if you understand yourself and it gives you a framework to maybe have some insight into how others may have a different motivation and different communication style than you, so that you can be a more effective partner and communicator. So I love that book from her, and also just, her guidance on meditation in general, because we could all use the mindfulness in this career.
Well, I mean, if you think about getting things done too, it's about kind of the mental clutter, right? How do you get all of that out of your mind? And with compliance officers, executives, or CEOs who are responsible for these people, right? It's like, how do you keep from getting overwhelmed and getting all this stuff out of your mind? And then what do you think that they're the first steps that compliance is slipping through the cracks because there's so much overwhelming information when it comes to either understanding it from a board level, understanding it from a CEO level, or even kind of regurgitating it as a compliance officer? You see any ways that you would ever see first signs of, manage? I don't know if you call it managing your compliance officers, but you partner with them at the different portfolio companies. How do you take that kind of philosophy and then help them through their overwhelming standpoints?
Yeah. If you look at it, well, I would combine both of the things I talked about, right? So if you look at getting things done, I think it's just it's an organizational approach. So you can pick an approach that works for you, but it's back to basics. So doing that weekly review of projects, right? Where you give yourself a set time every week to sit down and go through each of the work streams that you have going on. And you defeat overwhelm by coming up with the exact actionable next thing. So instead of thinking about the end goal of a huge project, you think, what's the next concrete step that I'm going to take to keep it moving forward? So I think things like that can be really helpful in avoiding overwhelm and just creating that mental space for yourself, or even as simple as the 2-minute rule with emails, where as you're going through your email, if you hit one that you can complete and get off your plate in less than 2 minutes, just do it, so that you're not having that pile of things in your email waiting for you to do them that starts to make you feel overwhelmed. So I think it's got some great advice from that perspective. And then on the mindfulness front, I mean, how that translates for me to the work environment is things like, I mean, it sounds basic, but it's so helpful to just turn off your alerts, right? Like I don't have pop-up. I don't have anything dinging on my computer screen. If I'm like I am with you right now, focusing in a meeting, I will turn off my other screen so that you're not doing the Pavlovian, I think I see something popping up on my other screen, and you can stay focused on the present moment and hopefully be a better listener to the person you're meant to be spending the time with. So I think mindfulness can be helpful just in little ways like that. And even though I feel like I'm the worst meditator of all times, because I cannot, which is not the point of meditation is not to clear your mind, but it can feel frustrating, right? When you're sitting there and you can't clear it for what feels like 3 breaths. But I do notice when I'm consistent with a meditation practice that I do find my focus sharper during the day and my ability to refocus, because you're always going to get distracted.
Right.
It's whether you can realize you're distracted and come back. That's the real benefit, right? So those are some of the ways that I try to help, just in a very foundational way, past those things that have helped me on.
Yeah, those are the multitasking quote. There's no such thing as mental task or multitasking. It's just doing half of everything marginally well, right? Instead of focusing on that piece that you can do really, really well and getting it done from that standpoint. So good books. I love that. Hopefully everybody can take that away. And I got 2 out of those that I need to go watch or listen or read or listen to at some point in time. So, okay. Now you were the recipient of the Compliance Mentor of the Year Award. Great honor. That's wonderful. That's really, really awesome. What strategies did you put into place for kind of compliance professionals? And then how did you see their CEOs, their boards kind of react from that? And did they see some improvements, or what strategies you put into place so that mentorship can really develop into this really compliance executive relationship that builds that kind of strategic partnership?
I feel like you and I chat about a lot of this
Cool.
stuff because we have similar philosophies
Yes.
here. But I think a lot of what I talk to other compliance professionals about is how, and it ties into the Enneagram too, right? Because it's really understanding the motivation and the communication style of your executive team or your board, and really thinking through, okay, so what is my goal? If I am successful in this, let's call it, say, a board meeting, right?
Sure.
Success in this board meeting for me means that I will have communicated this message so that the board members will be able to take an action, make a decision, come up with very concretely, I'm going to communicate this so that they are able to do this. And if I'm successful, this is how they're going to feel when I leave that meeting. And I think where people stumble sometimes is, I think compliance leaders are very good at knowing what it is that they want to communicate. But in order to effectively deliver that message, it's really about thinking, what are the strategic goals of this group? What is important for them? If it's a board meeting, what's important for them is probably to feel that they have been assured that you're aware of the risk to that business and that you have proactive plans in place to control for that risk where possible or mitigate that risk. So how are you going to communicate that message to them in a way that feels reassuring to them, gives them concrete evidence that you're working with the team at that organization to protect the company from risk, to mitigate the risk, and so that they feel when you left, like, okay, that person knows what they're doing. They understand the strategic goals of this organization, and they're working to support those goals and to further those goals, that they should feel confident and assured when you leave. And sometimes that can be tough, especially if you have a compliance issue going on that you need to discuss with them. But if you always couch it in terms of, this is why it's important to the strategic aims of this business, and this is how, the action plan that we have supports the goals of this business, and then hopefully when you leave, they're going to have that feeling of assurance and confidence. So that's usually my goal, is talking through whatever the upcoming situation is and thinking, have you really thought about your audience? What are they worried about? How is what you're going to say meaningful to them based on that? Just helps people kind of game plan and maybe do a test run. We could do a little role play through something to make sure they feel ready for those interactions.
I do think that's the core behind creating compliance as something other than just sitting in the background, waiting for something to happen and react to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we as compliance executives are coming to the table, and we are brought to the table as a strategic partner by the CEO and others that are part of the leadership team, then knowing the business, knowing how it's going forward, its growth trajectory, and how it's going to get there, and then how all the compliance issues fit into these different growth strategies and whatever it may be, really does start to create that advantage for the boards and the CEOs. And then the CEOs, again, I'm just echoing everything that you said, the CEOs then start looking at their compliance executive and going, good choice. I'm glad I pulled that person in. I'm glad they're part of my executive leadership team. The board sit there and go, I can breathe a sigh of relief knowing that this person here is going to be clear, concise, and complete when it comes to board meetings. And I know exactly what these risk factors are. They're not sending me down a rabbit hole where I have to go worry about something that's not really a compliance issue because I just really wanted to tell you about it because I get bored time. And we've all heard those people. And that's just where compliance becomes a roadblock in a growth trajectory standpoint. So
I
I
love what
agree.
you just said about risk, because I think where a lot of people get it wrong is you need to communicate that when you say risk assessment or risk, you're talking about risk to the strategic goals of this
Right.
specific business. You're not talking about, as you said, some nebulous general, we have a big book of risks as compliance officers, and we're going to tell you about them. If you're effective, you're being really specific. When I say risk, I mean risk to this business meeting its goals. And if you can tell them that, that's going to be much more meaningful.
Risks is variable, right? It's financial risk, it's reputational risk, it's growth risks. Go down the list, but what it's not is, hey, I think this is really bad, but it's really not. And it's just something for me to talk about because it sounds important. And
Yeah.
it's a very self-centered, I love the book, Good to Great. I don't know if you've ever kind of read Good to Great. When he's talking about leaders are looking out the window and all the people that are doing good things for the organizations, as opposed to looking in the window at yourself.
Yeah.
And as a compliance executive, you're going to the boards and you're really talking about these things that you think are really important instead of those things that from a business strategy standpoint are what everybody else in the room is really listening to and why they're there.
Right.
It's a very selfless way to present to that board, knowing what those risks are.
This episode of the Compliance Advantage podcast is brought to you by Ronan Healthcare Compliance. At Ronan Healthcare Compliance, we believe in transforming healthcare compliance from a checkbox attitude to a strategic advantage. With decades of expertise, our team of consultants provides innovative solutions tailored to your organization's unique needs. We don't just help you meet your standards. We elevate your business, ensuring ethical practices are at the heart of what you do. Whether you're navigating complex regulations or seeking to enhance your compliance strategy, Ronan Healthcare Compliance is your partner in achieving excellence in healthcare compliance. Ronan Healthcare Compliance, redefining compliance, empowering leadership. Visit us at ronanhc.com to learn more. Now, back to the show.
It's kind of funny because I guess when you're a compliance person, no matter what you're doing, things give you ideas about compliance. And I have a Peloton, and one of my favorite instructors always says, I make recommendations, you make decisions. And when he said that, I always think, oh, that's kind of it, right? I'm going to try to give you the best recommendations possible so that you can make a good decision, is kind of my approach to the executive team or the
Well,
board.
that's what we are, right? We are advisors, or we give the information. And if you give bad information, that is where you don't want to be. And that's where you lose any advantage that you would ever have.
Yeah.
So when you kind of look at that again as a business strategic advantage, do you have any aha moments where all of a sudden you went from physical therapist to told to be a compliance officer to getting into this thing where you're like, oh, that's what this means, versus, because we all started in compliance, and back in the day it was you were anointed compliance officer by the guidance by the OIG, and you walk in and you're not really an officer, you're not a police officer, you're not an officer of the company, you're really not an officer at all of anything other than compliance. And that really didn't mean anything back then, and we all kind of walked around with a hammer trying to find a nail, right?
Yeah.
So did you have some sort of aha moment where you're like, oh,
I think right off the bat, the first company where I was in a compliance leadership role was a geriatric focused company. So as you might imagine, 98% Medicare, right? So nothing going on there from a compliance standpoint, right?
don't look here, don't look
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. And I think the first realization I had in that context was when I would be defending that company in an investigation or an appeal of an audit, maybe even the ALJ level of an appeal. And I really felt the value of being able to stand on solid compliance to, defend the work of the company and keep the money that our clinicians had worked so hard to make. And we were doing it correctly, and we were providing very much needed care to a population at risk. And so to be able to have a role in being a protector of that in a sense. That was one moment where I felt the value of it. And then before I came to Wad, when I was but first working in the private equity space, I saw firsthand, and maybe this was foreshadowing that I would end up at a private equity firm someday, although I had no idea at the time. But I remember, going through an acquisition where, as I think still happens sometimes, you have diligence focusing in large part on the financials, right, at first. So you get through the vast majority of diligence that's highly concentrated on quality of earnings and the financial end of things, and everyone's feeling pretty good and they've worked really hard to get close to the finish line of that deal. And then, here comes potentially a damaging issue that is compliance related. And for me, this is the first time I was going through a deal. And here I am, it's me and the CEOs of both companies and probably attorneys from two firms on that call that I would love to know the hourly cost of those calls. And it's 10 o'clock at night. And what are we talking about when we're getting down to the wire on this deal? We're talking about a compliance related issue. It can really make or break the structure of a deal. Like, no one wants to see a stock deal go asset, or, that no one wants to see a huge escrow in place because of a potential compliance risk, or no one wants to hear that you're not going to get reps and warranty insurance on something. And so compliance can be a real linchpin in the 11th hour. It's not going to be the first thing. Well, maybe in our case it is, but it's often not going to be the first thing that people are looking at, but it can really cause you a headache if it's not in place. And I felt like, wow, that's powerful. What we're doing really can matter to the value of the business at the end of the day. So
It's interesting because I have the same kind of aha moment. It was a lot of due diligence in my previous life, going public, private, and being purchased by very large private equity groups. It was the same thing, right? It was making sure a compliance program has its 7 elements, right? We all know this. It's like beat into our brains. They all do mean something. It's not hard to put them into place. It's hard to operationalize them and make them work, right? So on these kind of due diligence and showing the world, whoever's buying you, whatever it may be, or who you're partnering with, showing the world that you have this thing and it runs. It's a car, right? And it runs. You put the chassis together. You have all the steering wheel and everything. Put the engine in. Now you sit behind. You got to drive it, right? You got to make sure it gets from here to there. And that's your compliance program. And in a due diligence standpoint, showing that you have this nice thing, and then showing that you're actually making it work and operationalizing it by identifying compliance risks, but also looking at them and going, but we got this, right? We are on top of this. Yeah, there may be risk to it. I've already assessed the risks. I know what it is. I know where we're at. We've already done audits. We've done shadow reviews. We've done this. We've done that. We got outside counsel involved. But guess what? We know what we have here versus we don't know what we don't know, right? And that to me is such a powerful aha moment that I had too.
Yeah.
When I would get on these calls and I go, here's this, here's that. Yeah, we got a CIA, but here's all our reports. Everything is good. We're good neighbors, and we're good stewards of our CIA with the OIG. That means we're good.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, yes, that's great.
Yep. Agreed.
So very
powerful.
Similar. Yeah. And to your other point with the audits, I think that's the same kind of thing too. It's just really showing to regulators. Did you find in your kind of audit example where you were able to come to the table and say, yes, we have these things. Yes, we're good, that it reduced? Because I think I read something the other day, $1 spent saves $6 in fines, penalties, and legal fees for every organization. And I say this number a lot, but did you see that down the road, you saw benefits from that, whether it's a UPIC audit, TPE, or whatever else? Did you see any benefits from that one audit that you were able to successfully win?
Yeah, I think it helps you in a number of ways. We always put a considerable amount of resources into our internal audit program, which is very helpful because hopefully you're finding pain points before an outside auditor finds what I call like friendly fire, right? Like you get in there and find your own issues. At the time, I was not in an equity situation, right? But now in hindsight, what a great ad for transactional readiness if you can say, hey, listen, here's the number of dollars that were at risk from payer audits last year, and we only lost or had to repay X number of dollars, and it's a very low percentage, or our overturn rate on appeal is 89% because we have the right documentation in our medical records, because we do internal audits and we do education based on those audits. And so you don't have risk lurking in your medical records here because, we're on top of it. I mean, that's dollars to the bottom line that you don't have to worry.
Checking the profits. Love to talk about protect the profits, right?
Yeah.
What's the biggest misconception about compliance that most CEOs or any other healthcare executives have these days?
I would say either that they see compliance as a constraint. It's not a constraint. It's an accelerator if you're doing it right. Or that compliance is somehow separate from the rest of business strategy.
Mhm.
I think compliance should be baked in to your business strategy. I think it's Hema Lomax. She's another good compliance friend. And she spoke to our group last year, and she was talking about compliance. When you think about compliance being a constraint or compliance hitting the brakes, she said, think about compliance as hitting the brakes. Like you need to tap the brakes, right? If you're a race car driver, if you don't tap the brakes when you're going around the corner of the racetrack, you're going to fly off the track. It's physics, right?
Yep.
So you need judiciously applied brake to win the race so that you stay on the track and you don't get in an accident. And I love that analogy because, that's how we want to be seen, is that we're not slamming on the brakes. We're not trying to drive like grandma. We're trying to make sure you're safe so that you can get where you're going safely, but as fast as you can.
Do you think that really depends on the compliance executive that's in place?
Sure. Yeah, like anything else, right? You could have a good COO or a good CFO, a good CEO. You can have a good compliance officer too. You need someone who understands the business and can be a good strategic partner.
Got it. Got it. I think you answered my next question, which is what would you see as a change agent for compliance? It's really that being standing in the road. Is there anything else that you think of just to say, how can we perceive compliance in a better manner? And then how do you educate, let's just say your partners at Wad, right? How do you educate them even further from what they're already educated on how things can be perceived in moving from this kind of roadblock to this compliance advantage?
It is demonstrating, being able to point out, for instance, you're doing due diligence. Good compliance due diligence could give you insight about your quality of earning,
Of
right?
course.
So say you're in a healthcare organization and you're doing diligence and someone is using personnel, but they're billing for personnel who are not credentialed, right?
Sure.
And you figure that out because of compliance diligence. Well, their cost per visit is going to be way different. They're either going to have to employ more expensive personnel to do what they're doing, or they're going to have to decrease the volume to use their qualified personnel that they have, right?
Sure.
So you want to point out things like that show how compliance is not like academic. It
Right.
is directly connected to the business. I think that's how we start to change the perception, and also making sure that you always lead with understanding the organization that you're in. So like if you're a new compliance officer somewhere, take the time to learn the business before you start making recommendations, and go spend time with revenue cycle, spend time with human resources, spend time with operations, and ask them, what are your strategic goals? What does success look like for you to your stakeholders? And be seen as someone who is caring about everyone else's goals and objectives, and that you understand the business, and then make recommendations.
I love that you brought that up because I think that is a big perception that compliance has, at least in my experience, is coming in, wanting to take control over anything and everything. I call it big C, little c, right? Big C compliance versus little c compliance, right? Big C compliance department, the program that you're operating under. And little c is compliance with everything. There's compliance across the board with every single thing. Doesn't matter what department that you're in, right? And the perception is that compliance comes in as just going to run rimshot over everything. And in reality, like you said, partnership is the key, right? Partnership is the key, especially to those other support departments like HR, quality, legal, whatever it may be. And a lot of the times we see that compliance wants to do their job, right? Wants to jump into an HR perspective or jump into something as opposed to empowering them by staying out of it to do their job and being the resource that person would need if they need some assistance.
Right.
I don't know if you get involved in like an HR investigation, but we often get involved in an HR investigation, but HR has to come to us and say, this is about one of my people, or
Right.
this is about something. I need someone who can do an investigation unbiasedly. And I don't know if you see that trend going on with your groups.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's because you built those relationships so that people see you as a trusted advisor, as a neutral third party, the Switzerland of the executive team, that you can come in and help in those situations. And they trust you to be measured and to understand that team's values and perspective and what you do. I think it's really important.
It's very important to acknowledge for sure. All right. One of the last questions that I have is the superhero question. If compliance was a superhero, tell me what it would be. Love to hear this opinion from a lot of people. A lot of people hate this question. I love it because I love to see how people think.
So if compliance could have a superpower, I think it would be time travel.
Okay.
Because I think if we're doing our job well, we're doing a really good job at taking lessons from the past and seeing ahead into the future and doing things proactively so that our future business has a smooth path. So it's almost like we can see what's coming before it gets there.
And that's about being proactive, right? I mean, that's the whole prediction or the whole point behind being proactive is to try to see in the future. And so you're expecting things to happen. So I think we're almost there. I think it's almost a superpower that we have. We just won't tell anybody that.
I think we have moments of it for sure. Yeah.
Some do, some don't, but we can make that across the board. What are your final kind of thoughts or advice that you'd give to like CEOs and boards? You talk to these people all day long. You've got multiple boards you deal with, multiple chairpersons of the board. What's kind of your biggest guidance to them on fostering that culture of compliance, top down, getting it involved? I really dislike the word culture of compliance because I think it's way overused, but I think it is very important if you do it right. So what is your guidance and what's your advice to those healthcare leaders?
The most important thing executives can do to support us in our work and to create that culture is to include compliance, include them in strategy meetings, include them in leadership offsite, include them in town hall meetings, include them in, monthly operations calls. Just include compliance because it's the best way to make it second nature that compliance is just part of the business so that everyone knows that compliance, if we're talking strategy, if we're talking budget, if we're talking operational plans, compliance is there just because we can provide unique insight and it helps us better understand the business so that we could be a better partner to the business. And I think just having us included is the best thing they can do to perpetuate that.
Creates that advantage. Yeah, absolutely creates that advantage for you. All right. I said last question before. Now it's the really last question. What do you do to take care of yourself? Health is wealth. You already do the Buddhist Enneagram. So I know that there's a lot of meditation going on there. So I'll get out of mind and spirit. You already got that going. What do you do from a physical standpoint?
I am a Peloton person. I have the tread and the bike, which my kids tell me is bougie. But I really my time is the morning. I started that when my kids were I'm an empty nester now, but back in the day, that was the only time I could be guaranteed to get my time in
Hmm.
was first thing in the morning. So I like to just start out and, either do a hike or a ride or some yoga or some resistance training. Not every day, but I would say like, if I can get in 5 days a week of something that is my endorphin, that keeps
Yep.
me sane, keeps me on an even keel. And then I like to follow that up with, I like to try to go outside to
Hmm.
meditate because I really like the sun in the morning, sets your circadian rhythm for the rest of the day. And I love birds. As I age and I turn into my mother, which I think is happening, I do love to bird watch. And I am starting to learn. I have an app that tells you what bird sounds are what birds. So I'm trying to get better at recognizing what I'm hearing, but it's also really nice from a meditative standpoint to hear, nature sounds. So that's what I try to do to start the day off right.
Well, I hope everybody hears that. Those are great ones. I love the 15, 20-minute intervals on the Peloton, by the way. At the end of my workout, my weight workout, I always get that in there. And I have
All
my
right.
favorite too. So I feel you on the Peloton. I've
Okay.
never done the treadmill, but I've done the bike quite a bit.
Yeah, the tread is fun. It's pretty addictive too. So,
Is it?
and if you already have the subscription, you don't need a second subscription to have a second piece of
Oh,
equipment. It's just saying. I don't get paid by Peloton at all.
you might end up with a free Peloton in your front door. We call that a kickback, by the way. But you can do that outside of healthcare, right? So, well, Melanie, so much appreciate you joining us today, and your insights are valuable. You are a unicorn, I will have to say. I don't think there's a lot of you in this industry. And the fact that we have a good relationship and cooperating on a lot of different things
Yeah.
and going forward. I love the relationship we have. And thank you so much for sharing your insight. I hope everybody kind of takes something great from it. Thank you for
Oh,
being.
thanks, Ross. It was really nice of you to invite me to be on, and I always love talking to you. So it's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Compliance Advantage podcast. If you enjoyed it, please rate, review, and share this episode with someone who might benefit from it. Don't forget to visit us at ronanhc.com for more resources and connect with us on social media for the latest updates. And remember, compliance pays dividends. Invest today.